Jason and I both experienced a new beginning, though he remained unaware of it, still seeing me as the same foolish person from my past life. I provided him with the best resources, enrolled him in top universities, and even supported him in starting his own business, even if it meant bankrupting my family. In the end, he drained all my value and discarded me. To make matters worse, he brought my greatest adversary to me and declared that he was finally free from the humiliation I'd caused in this new life. I vowed I wouldn't give him another penny. When the time came to choose the recipient for one-on-one funding, Jason stood before me with arrogance and self-assurance. But I deliberately passed him by and selected the humble student next to him instead. Representing the Stella family, I attended the yearly charity event to show our dedication to the funding recipients. Every year, we chose one student for one-on-one funding, connecting them directly with our team. In my past life, I had immediately been drawn to Jason among the many candidates. Unfortunately, he turned out to be ungrateful. This time, before the event, I made sure to inform Vivian, my sworn enemy in my previous life, Jason's idealized woman. Jason had told me more than once that Vivian had secretly admired him even before I started funding him, and that it was me who had blocked their love with my money. This time, I was eager to see if Vivian had truly noticed him before he became my boyfriend. When Vivian and I entered the hall, everyone had already gathered. Over 100 people were standing packed into the space. I spotted Jason immediately. I must admit I had good taste when it came to appearances. He was tall, over 1.8 meters, with a lean frame and fair skin. Among the group of plain, struggling students, Jason stood out like a crane in a flock of chickens. The moment he noticed my gaze, he straightened up and lifted his chin even higher. I knew that, like me, he had been reborn. Once the president of a nearly $10 billion company, Jason was now back to being a poor student. I wondered how he felt about this shift and how he would react to the humiliation the person he hated most, was about to bring him. As I entered, the school officials greeted me enthusiastically, constantly thanking the Stella family for providing such opportunities to students in need. Even the bystanders knew how to express gratitude. But Jason, who viewed all my efforts as nothing but humiliation, had made me decide to withdraw my affection. I hoped that would satisfy him. I gave a few modest remarks, claiming it was our duty and that we were fulfilling the social responsibility of a business, and then moved to the next part of the event. The school staff then conducted a screening of the candidates based on various factors like academic performance and achievements, narrowing it down to 10 finalists. It was my responsibility to choose one for the one-on-one funding. Sitting at the table, I listened as the candidates came up one by one to introduce themselves. They were all outstanding, though material limitations had held them back from progressing further. The purpose of our funding was to offer them a chance to cross the initial barrier in their paths. As each student spoke, I could see gratitude and hope in their eyes. Everyone knew that the one-on-one funding meant better resources and a chance for a brighter future. Then it was Jason's turn. He was indeed impressive, consistently ranking among the top 10 in grades and having won multiple provincial and national awards. The organizer clearly had a high opinion of him, so he asked Jason to speak a little more to leave a stronger impression on me. However, Jason coldly responded with a simple hello. The person in charge frowned, but Jason didn't seem to care at all. He looked at me with disdain. In my past life, after hearing Jason's introduction, I had skipped over the other candidates and selected him. He must have expected the same this time. Unfortunately for him, I turned to the person in charge and said, "Don't force it. Let's move on to the next student." Jason was taken aback and didn't leave right away. The person in charge urged him to step aside, and Jason shot me a cold glare before turning to leave. I ignored him, not even sparing him a glance, and focused on the next candidate. After hearing from all of them, I chose Ryan. He hadn't won any awards, but his grades had always been at the top, and he was the only one with scars on his face, the result of an abusive father. He seemed resigned, but when I announced him as the chosen one, he looked at me and quietly said, "Thank you." Jason, clearly upset, sneered and muttered, "A bookworm who only knows how to study." Ryan didn't respond, keeping his lips tightly sealed, but I had no intention of letting Jason spoil this moment. "Are you bullying your classmate?" I asked coldly. Jason stared at me in surprise before wearing an expression that seemed to say, "So, this is it. You're just trying to get my attention." I almost felt sickened by him, but Jason only grew more composed and aloof. "I'm just speaking the truth," he said, as if he saw no issue with his words. I didn't engage with him further and turned to the school representatives asking, "Are these the candidates you've selected?" I pointed out my concern about Jason's moral character. "I'm looking to fund future talents who will pass on this kindness, not someone who casually mocks their peers. This student displays an arrogant attitude, and I seriously doubt whether he'll lend a hand to others when he's able." I made sure to highlight the importance of character, clearly marking Jason's behavior. This time, I wasn't about to waste my goodwill on such an ungrateful person. Sure enough, my words drew the attention of everyone present at the school. The person in charge quickly stepped forward and demanded that Jason apologize to Ryan immediately, or else his funding would be revoked. Jason glared at me in anger, but I didn't even bother to meet his gaze. Didn't he claim that the money I spent on him was a humiliation? I wanted to see if the powerful former president, Jason, would lower his pride and beg me to spare him for such a small amount of funding. "I won't apologize," Jason said firmly. "Don't think your money can make me bow down to you. One day, Jason will show you what it really means not to bully the poor." His words sounded so righteous, and the room fell silent. So, not funding him meant bullying him? The nerve of him. Suddenly, applause echoed through the room. It was Vivian. She clapped her hands and walked over to stand beside me. "Such a principled classmate, Stella." "You shouldn't bully him," Vivian said, pretending to help Jason, trying to shift the blame for bullying the poor onto me. As soon as she spoke, Jason's face lit up. He must have been imagining some romantic drama, where the girl who secretly admired him bravely stood up for him under pressure. Unfortunately for him, I could easily spot the fake smile at the corner of Vivian's lips. She was just trying to use Jason to provoke me. I wasn't as foolish as before to let her turn me into the villain with just a few words. But it was Jason who refused to apologize first. I deliberately shot him a contemptuous look, and as expected, he lifted his chin and glared back at me. "I'm not wrong," he insisted. I sighed dramatically and said, "Our Stella family group will never fund a recipient who can't get along with their classmates." Then I changed the subject. "Since you think so highly of him, Vivian, why don't your family fund him instead?" As soon as I spoke, Jason's eyes brightened, and he looked at Vivian expectantly. Vivian, however, stammered and looked embarrassed. She finally muttered, "I'll go back and discuss it with my family." How amusing. Vivian was merely an insignificant member of a collateral branch of the SE family. There was no way her family would fund him, but seeing the smug look on Jason's face, as if he thought Vivian would help him without my money, I silently decided to sit back and enjoy the show. I was eager to see what Jason would do without the funding from the Stella family. Ryan and I got accepted into the prestigious Jingai University, while Jason ended up at the nearby Normal University. His grades were good enough for Jingai, but the Normal University offered cheaper housing and meals, along with some financial support each month. Ryan and I crossed paths with Jason one day. He gave Ryan a condescending once-over and sneered, "Pretty boy." This had happened before in my past life. Back then, I had been drawn to him and always found excuses to be near him. Gradually, rumors spread that he was involved with the eldest daughter of the Stella family, and he wouldn't need to worry about his future. Once, when I accompanied him to the cafeteria to get food, someone mockingly called him a kept man. Jason's face instantly darkened, and the person who had made the comment walked off triumphantly. Jason, enraged, spun around and knocked over my dinner plate, shouting for me to stay away from him. The greasy food splashed all over me, and everyone around stared. I remember that feeling of humiliation, wishing I could disappear. I regretted not slapping him right then and there. What a jerk! He got angry when others insulted him. Yet when he was the one belittling someone else, he didn't hesitate. Before I could speak, Ryan stepped forward and stared Jason down. "You're jealous of me," he said, his tone calm and matter-of-fact, as if he saw through Jason completely. Jason took a step back, trying to stay composed. "What do I have to be jealous of you for?" he retorted. Ryan took another step forward. "You're jealous because I can go to Jingai University and you can't. You're jealous because Stella chose me, not you. You're jealous because I'm the one standing here, not you." Ryan's sharp words left me almost wanting to clap for him. Jason was clearly at a disadvantage. After all, he couldn't claim that he went to the Normal University because he didn't want to attend Jingai. Eventually, he could only mutter, "I don't have time to argue with you," and fled. Once Jason was gone, Ryan softened and stepped back to my side. "Aren't you mad?" I asked. Ryan replied, I'm fine. At least the one I chose this time is mentally healthy, unlike the last one, who became an ungrateful jerk over a few rumors. I thought after this incident with Jason's bruised pride, he wouldn't bother me for a while. However, I underestimated his ability to adapt. I was studying in the library when he came to find me. Stella, I'll give you the chance to invest in my new energy company. If you invest 50 million, you'll get 0.1% of the company's original shares. Jason stood at my desk, leaning over it, looking down at me with a mixture of sarcasm, coldness, indifference, and just a hint of condescension. He really had the demeanor of a domineering CEO, as if he had reached the peak and was now showing off. Who would be so arrogant when seeking investment? I kicked the leg of the table and pushed it away. I pushed the stool aside and got up. You're too close, I said. Jason twisted his wrist and stumbled as he tried to steady himself. While he still projected an air of arrogance, it was less suffocating than before, especially when it was directed at me. The students around us who had been reading were now disturbed, and I could feel their disapproving stares. I apologized sincerely. Sorry, this student from another school was bothering me, and I couldn't hold back for a moment. Who are you saying was bothering you? Jason immediately raised his voice. Several tall, strong male classmates who had been reading stood up in an instant. Jason quickly backpedaled. It's a misunderstanding, just a misunderstanding. I assured them it was fine, and soon they sat back down. Jason then lowered his voice and gritted his teeth. Stella, don't push your luck. I shrugged, signaling that his threat held no weight with me. Jason was furious but had no choice but to maintain his composure and negotiate. Think carefully, Stella. If you don't invest in my company, don't blame me when your family goes bankrupt. Jason looked down at me, almost like a creator gazing at a collection of dolls in a cabinet. It suddenly clicked in my mind. I recalled my previous life, when I had used every ounce of my family's financial resources to invest in his business, threatening my family's well-being. Due to a break in the capital chain, our family nearly went bankrupt. Only after his technology made a breakthrough did he manage to attract new investment, which helped save the Stella family from financial ruin. No wonder he always seemed so arrogant. He viewed himself as the savior of my family. But if it weren't for giving him such a large sum of money, how could our capital have been jeopardized in the first place? People like him, even when reborn, only remember the parts of the story that benefit them, ignoring everything else. Now that I understood his mindset, I felt even less inclined to be polite. If you want to attract investment, does your company even have the right qualifications? Do you have a team, a business plan, an income statement? Jason couldn't answer any of these questions. I looked at him with disdain. You came to me for investment with nothing but your face? I clearly intended to put him in his place, but Jason's expression was a mix of shame and anger. Stella, don't think that just because you have money you can do whatever you want. I will never yield to you. If you don't want to invest in me, fine. But I'll wait and see when you regret it. With that, he quickly stormed out of the library, looking rather ridiculous, as if he had been wronged. But honestly, I just didn't want to spend my money on him. Despite this, Jason still managed to secure investment. It was said that Vivian helped him find 5 million Wayne in exchange for 51% of the original shares in his newly formed company. Instantly, Jason became a campus celebrity. He was studying the best teaching major at the Normal University, but those courses weren't helpful for his business. He rarely attended class, and when a teacher criticized him for neglecting his studies, he rudely retorted, asking how many years of the teacher's salary would equal the 5 million yen he had secured in investment. After that, no one bothered to deal with him anymore. I knew about Jason's startup project. He was a smart individual in his past life, entering the new energy vehicle industry and focusing on battery life. Back then, I admired him and thought he was truly talented. I used my family's connections to get him into the best major, new energy science and engineering, at Jingai University. He studied diligently for 4 years, and after entering graduate school, he co-founded a company with his supervisor. But now he was just a freshman, a newcomer to the university. Even with the memories of his past life as President Jason, who had been removed from the cutting edge of technology for years, could he really succeed in starting a business based solely on the technology he developed on his own? I was curious to see how this would play out. Jason formed a startup team, reaching out to those who had worked with him in his past life. Unfortunately, only a few people with circumstances similar to his were persuaded to join him. As for his previous supervisor, I heard that he outright rejected Jason without even meeting with him. The supervisor was a top technical expert, and why would he pay any attention to a poor student from a different school with no ties to him? I, on the other hand, used my alumni status and an initial investment of 30 million yuan to easily secure a partnership with Professor Zhang. By the way, I also got Ryan into the team. He was majoring in the same field, and by joining Professor Zhang's team early on, he would be able to transition smoothly from undergraduate to master's and then eventually to a doctorate. It was a great opportunity. Soon after Ryan joined, he began sharing complaints from his senior classmates about Jason. For example, Jason once ordered, "I want the information on all competitors within 3 minutes." His fellow apprentice huffed in frustration as he scrambled to comply. The data statistics website buzzed with activity, and when it reached the point where a membership was required to continue the search, the person turned the computer screen toward Jason. The dominant and confident air Jason typically carried, which seemed higher than an 18-story building, instantly deflated when he saw the membership fee. It was 300,000 yuan. For Jason, who had the Stella family's support in his previous life, it was just a few lines of free background information. But now, he had to face the steep cost of acquiring new data. Naturally, the membership wasn't activated. An hour later, Jason provided a list of several companies and asked them to look into their new products. However, after searching, there was very little information available, and one of the companies didn't even exist. When the senior apprentice reported back, Jason angrily pointed at him and scolded him for half an hour, saying that these were industry leaders, and demanded why there was so little data. Jason expected a lot with minimal investment. The senior apprentice, unable to take it any longer, had a heated argument with Jason and then quit. When he returned, he complained to Ryan and the others about Jason, saying that he lacked the true aura of a domineering president and instead acted like a spoiled heir. I privately thought that was a very accurate description. Jason had always been extremely arrogant in his previous life. Everything went smoothly because I had always used the resources of the Stella family to support him. If he needed data, the Stella family's strategy department was a member of various professional databases. If he needed plans, he had over a dozen managers, each specializing in different areas, summarizing them and presenting them to him. Then, Jason would just announce them. If he needed a breakthrough in technology, dozens of technical experts in the laboratory worked overtime, achieving patent results and putting Jason's name on them. These people gradually gave Jason the halo of being a technical genius and a rising star in business. But he always believed that it was his own brilliance that illuminated everything and everyone else. Unfortunately, I was blind back then and truly believed he was buried gold. Jason's startup team didn't last long. Just when they had made some initial progress, one person left with the core technology. Jason claimed it was stolen, but in reality, that person had applied for a patent, and Jason wanted to put his name on it. That person then took the technology to a second-generation wealthy kids company and earned 10 times more than under Jason. Jason was furious and went to cause trouble at that company. As a result, he got into a fight with the second-generation rich kid, and both ended up in the hospital. When I got the news, I immediately contacted Vivian and rushed to the hospital with her. In my previous life, that second-generation rich kid had no intention of letting Jason off easily, and I had to pay a high price to bail him out. This time, I was eager to see how Vivian would handle it. In the hospital ward, Jason lay alone with a cast on his leg, propped up high. On the other side, the second-generation rich kid sat in a wheelchair, his head wrapped in several layers of gauze, with a few burly men standing behind him. Jason looked pale with fear. It was indeed a scary sight. In my previous life, I had been terrified when I stood outside the ward to negotiate with them alone, but this time it was different. I was here to watch the show. When Jason saw Vivian and me, he seemed much more relaxed, especially when he saw me. A sense of superiority appeared on his face, as if he knew I couldn't let him go. He even looked a little displeased that we had arrived so late, which made me want to punch him twice. The second-generation rich kid noticed his gaze and directly turned to me, asking, Are you his girlfriend? I quickly waved my hands and backed away, saying, I'm just passing by. Jason glared at me angrily, but when he saw Vivian beside me, his expression softened, likely thinking I was jealous. I quickly moved a bit further away to avoid being caught up in his foolishness. As expected, the second-generation rich kid then turned to Vivian. Vivian stepped forward, and Jason's gaze softened as he looked at her. His eyes were almost shining with tenderness. Don't misunderstand, Vivian said. I'm just an ordinary classmate of his. I think there's a misunderstanding between you two. Let's clear it up. Vivian turned slightly toward the second-generation rich kid, tucking her hair behind her ear and revealing her delicate jawline. Misunderstanding? There's no misunderstanding, the second-generation rich kid replied. He smashed my head. I'm here to demand compensation. He looked at Vivian with ill intent. Vivian lowered her head with a soft expression. The second-generation rich kid sneered. Oh, what are you going to pay for him? Vivian paused for a moment, her weak and delicate demeanor intact. No, I'm just wondering if you could ask for less, considering my face. The second-generation rich kid stroked his chin and said, Fine. I was supposed to close a 100 million yuan deal today. He smashed my head, and now I can't seal the deal. Originally, he should have compensated me for all of it. But for your sake, I'll give him a 10% discount. Just pay me 90 million yuan. I'm being generous, don't you think? His demands were extortionate, and Vivian's face instantly lost all of its previous shyness. She said, I'm not familiar with this classmate of mine. If you have any issues, you'd better sort them out directly with him. After that, without even looking at Jason, she quickly walked out of the ward. Without anyone to defend him, Jason's expression visibly darkened, and the second-generation rich kid glared at him menacingly. If the compensation doesn't satisfy me, I'll have you thrown in jail. It was the same situation in my past life. Even though both of them were hurt, Jason was the one who initiated the fight. If the other party refused to settle, Jason would definitely face criminal charges. He knew this well. In my previous life, I secretly used the most profitable business sector of the Stella family to make an exchange with the second-generation rich kid, not only saving Jason but also helping him regain the core technology that had been taken. But this time, he had neither money nor influence, and still dared to confront someone at their own company. He likely assumed I would cover for him. As expected, Jason looked at me and said, Stella, if you help me solve this, I'll be your boyfriend. After speaking, he tightly shut his eyes and turned his head away, as though he had endured the greatest shame. In my previous life, I was concerned about his injuries and worried he would be under too much stress, so I never told him the cost I had paid. However, now I wanted him to see what he had lost. I deliberately acted as if I were touched, gazing eagerly at the rich second generation and asking melodramatically, Tell me, what do you want in exchange for letting him go? To my surprise, someone from the second-generation rich kid's side recognized me, and the compensation he demanded didn't go down. It increased. Ah, it's the eldest daughter of the Stella family. My mistake for not recognizing you earlier. We're all on the same side, so forget the money. It's vulgar. If you want me to let your companion go, just offer the Stella family's retail channels in exchange. The second-generation rich kid looked at me with a smile. Jason opened his eyes, suddenly turning his head. Having taken control of the Stella family in my previous life, he naturally understood the significance of their retail channels. I feigned hesitation, and Jason's expression shifted. He must have remembered how, in my previous life, the Stella family's retail channels were offered freely to others. But that was for him. I gave a mischievous smile in Jason's direction, noticing his intense gaze. If you really were my companion, I would have paid without hesitation, but some people don't know their place and have been tarnished by others. I don't have a habit of recycling trash. I rolled my eyes at Jason in disgust and walked out of the ward, exuding an air of dominance. TSK, that felt good. Jason wasn't sent to prison. What the second-generation rich kid wanted wasn't money. It was the project in Jason's hands. Jason was forced to hand over his entire startup team to the second-generation rich kid, and he himself signed an agreement, becoming an employee of that rich kid's company. Before graduation, he was only considered an intern, receiving a meager 1,000 yuan per month. When Vivian found out, she immediately confronted Jason. The 5 million yuan investment she had made in him came from one of her admirers from a rich second-generation background. Now, not only had she seen no return, but she had lost all her principal. Her admirer suspected she had colluded with Jason to scam him, and in a fit of anger, he dumped her. Vivian, furious, went straight to Jason. It was said that the two of them argued fiercely for a long time before Jason finally gave in, signing a promissory note for 5 million yen. With his current monthly allowance of 1,000 yen, he'd be unable to pay it back in this lifetime. I sneered inwardly at Vivian's naivety, but soon, I couldn't laugh anymore. That shameless Jason had already set his sights on me. Early the next morning, I left the dorm to go to class. As soon as I reached the stairs, I saw Jason waiting by the door. He had a small, clear plastic bag in his hand with 2 large steamed buns from the cafeteria inside. "Stella," he said, walking toward me with wide strides, "here are your favorite big steamed buns." He handed me the buns while flipping his hair dramatically. I was so repulsed that I almost gagged on my dinner from the night before. Jason wasn't stupid, and he clearly noticed my disgust. He furrowed his thick brows, impatient. "You don't like them? You always did before." He stopped mid-sentence, realizing he had made a slip. I couldn't help but sneer inwardly. In my past life, it was the time when he threw his dinner plate at me in the cafeteria, and I had been so embarrassed, I avoided him for a whole week. During that time, he had been treated terribly, and in the end, he couldn't bear it, and brought me breakfast, 2 cold, steamed buns. Now that I think about it, I suspect they were leftovers from the day before, but back then I was so infatuated, I only thought about how Jason had bought me breakfast. I ate those 2 steamed buns, even though they gave me a stomach ache for 3 days. Later, I happily chased after him. I really wish I could go back and slap that version of myself. I never liked steamed buns. "I don't like steamed buns," I said, turning to see Ryan had appeared behind me. He was holding a pink thermos box with a bottle of fresh milk resting on top. "I told you, you don't have to buy me breakfast every day," I added, feeling a bit embarrassed. "Not eating breakfast is bad for your stomach," Ryan said, handing me the milk. "One time, you mentioned having a stomach ache, and I thought it might be because you didn't eat breakfast. So, since then, I've been preparing something for you every day, rain or shine." I took the milk, which was just the right temperature and tasted quite good. Seeing that no one was paying attention to him, Jason scoffed and walked away. As he passed the trash can, he deliberately threw the steamed buns into it. The buns hit the can, bounced back, and fell to the ground with a thud. Jason didn't even glance back. "Such bad manners," I muttered. Wasting food is really wrong, I thought, as Ryan handed me the milk. The lunchbox walked over to grab the steamed buns, took them out of the plastic bag, and placed them in the area where classmates often fed stray cats. At that moment, I felt like he was somehow glowing. Jason, however, didn't give up. He always found a way to appear beside me, like an annoying fly that couldn't be swatted away. When I was in class, he saved a seat for me in advance and waved at me from a distance. I immediately complained to the teacher that someone was disturbing my studies. When I went to the cafeteria to eat, he asked me to stand in front of him in the long line. I simply turned and went up to the stir-fry section on the 3rd floor. When I went home on weekends, he waited downstairs and said he wanted to take a walk with me. I handed my bag to my assistant and got into the luxury car that came to pick me up. I was really irritated. When Ryan found out, he made more time to spend with me. He was already very busy with his studies and had to participate in the professor's project team, so his free time was very limited. However, when he was with me, he was always calm and composed. In the evening, after he finished studying, we fed the stray cats together downstairs in the dorm. The kittens were cautious but greedy. I broke the cod sausage into small pieces and placed them in the palm of my hand. The kittens came over when they smelled it, their wet, soft little tongues licking my palm, sending a tingling sensation through me that almost melted my heart. I was actually a little envious of the cats. Ryan's voice suddenly interrupted my thoughts, so soft I almost couldn't hear him. I turned my head and saw his bright, moist eyes. Only then did I realize how close I was to him. Our arms were touching, and I could almost feel his body warmth through the thin sleeves. The breeze carried the scent of grass and trees, not from the trees, but from Ryan himself. I tilted my head slightly, feeling a little intoxicated. "What are you doing?" A loud, angry shout shattered the moment. Jason was standing behind us, his face filled with fury. The kittens scattered in fear. Jason's eyes were locked on me, as though he wanted to tear me apart at that very moment. Ryan stood up and positioned himself in front of me. I tossed the small remaining bits of cod sausage in my hand, stood up, clapped my hands, and walked out from behind Ryan. "Who do you think you are?" questioning me. I looked at Jason with an emotionless gaze. Jason's voice was rough, as if his throat were constricted. His expression shifted from anger to confusion, then from confusion to regret, and finally showed a hint of pain. "You're mine," he said, staring at me stubbornly, as if I were the most precious thing in the world. Unfortunately, I didn't believe it. Even if it were true, it was too late. I controlled my emotions, turned to face Ryan, and said, "Go back early." Ryan nodded. "I'll watch you go upstairs first." I turned around and walked upstairs, ignoring Jason's calls from behind. I didn't stop or look back. Jason was like a pit of mud in my past life. I stepped into it, got covered in it, and even brought disaster to myself and my family. This time, I just needed to avoid him. Jason didn't pester me anymore, but the frequency with which Ryan visited didn't change. Having breakfast together in the morning and taking walks to feed the cats in the evening became almost routine. But one day, Ryan didn't show up from morning until night. I felt uneasy and asked his senior. The senior hadn't seen him in the lab and couldn't get in touch with him when he needed some materials. Using my family's connections, I investigated and discovered that Ryan had left school late the previous night and then vanished. I dug further and found that the last place he was seen was in a narrow, filthy alley, the area where Ryan's family lived. I remembered his alcoholic father and the injury on his face the first time we met. I quickly gathered a team and rushed to the location. The small, rundown house had blackened walls. A large man reeking of alcohol was leaning against the wall, holding a wine bottle. When he saw us, he just raised his hand to block the sunlight and continued drinking. "Where's Ryan?" I asked. The man ignored me. My team approached him and shook him a few times. He finally burped with a strong smell of alcohol and drunkenly said, "He was taken away. That little brat thought I wouldn't be able to find him if he didn't come back. Someone came to ask him to pay off my debts for me." The words flashed through my mind, but I didn't have time to process them fully. Finally, one of my team members slapped him twice. The man covered his head, begging for mercy, and then mentioned the creditor's name. I immediately led my team to rush there. Seeing the number of people I brought, the person in charge agreed I could bring just one person to talk. I agreed without hesitation. Ryan was locked in an empty room. In the center of the room was a table with a stool. Ryan was seated on the stool, his head resting on the table, staring at a promissory note. Blood stained his face and body, yet he still clenched his teeth and remained silent. "The young man is tough," B remarked, waving his hand, signaling his subordinates to release Ryan. Ryan then noticed me, his eyes flashing with anger. "Why? Why are you here?" Ryan tried to rise and approach, but he was firmly restrained. "Don't rush, young man," B said. "I think your sweetheart is doing well. Maybe she'll help pay off your father's gambling debts, and you two can leave peacefully. Wouldn't that be nice?" B walked over, grabbed the promissory note, and laid it out in front of me. "From the looks of you, I assume this million or so doesn't matter to you. If you pay it off for the young man, I'll respectfully see you both out. How about it?" I glanced at the amount on the note. It was over 1.2 million. "I'll pay it," I agreed immediately. Ryan's eyes darkened for a moment before he suddenly struggled. "Give me the note. I'll sign it. Don't ask her." His voice carried a trace of desperation. I felt a pang of sympathy and just wanted to pay the money and leave with him as quickly as possible. Suddenly, one of B's subordinates whispered something to him, and B's expression shifted. "Oh, it's Miss Stella from the Stella family. I apologize for my rudeness. Just a million or so. I guess I underestimated you." B waved his hand and someone brought him a new IOU. This one was for 100 million Wayan, with daily interest of 1%. "Miss Stella, just sign here and everything will be settled smoothly." I couldn't believe the audacity. I pursed my lips, saying nothing. B's men slowly surrounded us, while my bodyguards remained on high alert. Just as tensions reached their peak, someone broke through the door. It was the police. I had arranged for them to be called before I entered. The officers were quick, just as I had hoped. B and his gang were clearly rattled. In their panic, someone drew a gun and pointed it at me. When the gun went off, my mind went blank. It wasn't until the warm blood dripped onto my hands that I realized I was being tightly embraced by Ryan. B was arrested and Ryan was taken to the hospital. During the investigation, it was revealed that Jason had called Ryan out in the middle of the night. However, Jason insisted that he was only delivering a message from Ryan's father, so there was no way to charge him. After giving his statement, Jason left the police station, but both Ryan and I knew he wasn't truly innocent. While Ryan was in the hospital, Jason had the nerve to visit. Ryan's shoulder was injured, and he was half lying in bed. I was beside him, feeding him bird's nest soup. He felt a bit embarrassed at first, but when Jason entered, he took the spoon I handed him, drank slowly, and signaled with his eyes that he wanted more. I couldn't help but laugh. Jason looked at us with a dark expression, his face twisted. "Stella, what's so special about him? He's the son of a gambler. Is he really worth your time, or do you just enjoy playing with poor kids like them?" Jason had clearly lost his composure. He didn't even try to hide that he had been reborn in his words, but his accusations only made me laugh. Playing with him? In my past life, I didn't hesitate to sacrifice the entire Stella family for him. And you call that playing with? I was too tired to argue with him. "Jason, you're not welcome here. Please leave." But Jason didn't leave as he usually did. Instead, he walked up to me, crouched down, and tried to hold my hand. I pulled away. He looked frustrated but tried to calm himself. "Stella, stop messing around. Let's go back to how we were. Stay by my side, and I'll never treat you badly again, okay?" There was a trace of pleading in his eyes. I smiled at him, and when his eyes brightened, I softly responded, "I don't want to." I remembered the day in my previous life when I had begged him desperately to spare the Stella family and my parents. He had held Vivian's hand and stepped on mine, saying, "I don't want to." Ryan recovered quickly. On the first day after the doctor approved his discharge, he returned to the lab. My parents were shaken by the incident with B, and I had to balance my time between school and home. Life was relatively calm, until one day I noticed my father looking particularly troubled. After asking, I found out that something had gone wrong with the family business. Longtime clients had suddenly been taken by others, and during bidding, our competitors always knew our reserve prices. Even our previously strong retail channels were being interfered with, and the culprits were the rich second-generation kids who had clashed with Jason. They were causing trouble at every turn. Though it hadn't caused a devastating blow to the Stella family, it was becoming quite frustrating. My father, impatient with dealing with these issues, left everything to me. I knew this was all Jason's doing, using the knowledge from his past life, but finding proof was difficult. We decided to focus on a new energy project. After Jason's team was taken over by the wealthy second-generation group, things hadn't been going smoothly for them. After facing several setbacks, Jason turned to Professor Zhang, who was working with me. He had secretly approached Professor Zhang, but he didn't realize that the professor often told me stories about him as jokes. When that failed, Jason targeted Ryan's senior colleagues. Ryan told me that someone seemed tempted, but nothing had been done yet. Initially, I'd planned to ask Professor Zhang to transfer that senior colleague off the project, but instead, I instructed Ryan to keep an eye on him without alerting the opposition. Soon, the new energy project began making strides, and Professor Yang, along with the students, applied for a patent under the name of Joint Research and Development. Just as the patent was granted, Jason filed a lawsuit against Professor Zhang and the Stella family, accusing us of stealing their technology. The key witness was the senior colleague whom Jason had bribed. Not only that, but he also made a huge scene online, trying to use public opinion to tarnish the Stella family's reputation. "Stella, if you just come back to me, I'll drop the lawsuit before the trial," Jason said, his tone filled with confidence. How ridiculous. In my past life, I had devoted myself to him, but he treated me horribly. In this life, I've been holding him down at every turn, yet he's still desperate to come back to me. He's dreaming. I let out a cold laugh and walked past him. At the trial, Jason was extremely arrogant. He presented various data comparisons, attempting to prove that they had developed the technology first. Meanwhile, we only presented two pieces of evidence. The first was a surveillance video showing that the bribed senior colleague had secretly copied laboratory data and handed it to Jason. The second was a comparison of the actual core data, which showed that what the senior colleague had stolen was not the real data at all. Jason tried to accuse us of plagiarism with two completely different sets of data. The verdict was clear. Moreover, our lawyer filed a counterclaim, accusing Jason of instigating others to steal data, engaging in unfair competition, and spreading false accusations online that damaged our business reputation. Several charges were confirmed, and the case was immediately filed in court. Though the verdict couldn't be announced right away, Jason couldn't escape before the final ruling came. He requested to meet me for one last time. Ryan accompanied me and waited for me nearby. When Jason saw Ryan walking away, he sneered. "I never expected you'd still dare to like a poor guy." I knew he had figured out that I had been reborn. Being ungrateful and repaying kindness with hostility is a matter of character, not poverty. I no longer bothered to hide it. "So, you've been reborn too? Just like me." "We're the same," Jason said, staring at me intently. I couldn't help but be curious about how shameless he could be to think that I would change my mind and go back to him. "Jason," I rarely called his name, but when I did, he looked at me expectantly. I smiled. "I don't know if you remember, but you still owe me 5 million wan." Jason's face stiffened. I didn't want to be kind to him anymore. "Actually, I'm quite pleased to see you like this. In my previous life, it was because I liked you that you always felt superior to me. My love for you allowed you to climb to places you never deserved, but instead of being grateful, you considered the ladder I provided beneath you. If you hated it so much, you could have simply told me. You used everything I offered, while simultaneously trying to crush me underfoot. This time around, I've done nothing wrong to you. I've merely taken back what I once gave.